So today we talked about root cause analysis, and I just want to give you a pictorial view of what a root cause analysis looks like. Again, it's a method that you use to get to the root cause, obviously, but instead of focusing on an individual or their actions or something very close to the issue, you expand your view and you look at the policies and the structures and the bigger barriers that you can address whenever analyzing health issues. And this is much more efficient, um, but it takes those connections. People have to understand where you go. So let's talk about asthma, for example, and we'll just go through one of these. So there's lots of different whys that we could ask because again, you're just using why, and that is the whole process. Um, So asthma, you could have a lot of different questions, but we will go with like why someone might have uncontrolled asthma. So let's go down this pathway. Why might they have uncontrolled asthma? Well, malnutrition leaves someone susceptible for developing uncontrolled asthma. Why might they have malnutrition? Because they have obesity. We'll talk about this a little bit later in the semester, but obesity is considered malnutrition. So why might they be obese? Well, they might have a lack of access to nutritious food. They might have a lack of physical activity, but we'll go with a nutritious food. Why would they have lack of access to nutritious food? Well, they might live in a food desert, maybe because food prices are high, maybe because they have a low income. And so moving on, why might they live in a food desert? Because of city planning. And that is, something that you can tackle. Why might they live why might city planning, you know, put them in a food desert? Well, because of redlining. And, historical redlining, you might not be able to address, but you can make these connections just so you know what the root causes are. Why might food prices be elevated? Well, because of the Farm Bill, because it incentivizes um, farmers to grow certain crops, and those certain crops are not necessarily the most nutritious. Like there's no incentive for fruits and vegetables other than corn. And that, is a policy that can be changed. And why hasn't it been changed? Well, probably because of, lobbying. And that is a product of campaign financing, of lobbying itself. So let's explore low income. So they might live in a food desert. Why would they live in a food desert? Maybe because they're low income. And that is a cause of both living in a food desert and lack of nutritious food because they just might not be able to afford it. So why might they be low income? Well, that might be related to educational policies in terms of like suspensions and curriculum, so many different things. Funding of schools, especially if it's tied to the real estate in the neighborhood, that's not exactly an equitable policy, and that's definitely something that you can change. Low income because of wage policies, because of minimum wage, because of CEO versus like the bottom worker wage, discrimination because they can't get a job because we know that people with more ethnic sounding names are less likely to get called back even if they have the identical job application as someone with a more like Anglo-Saxon type of name. And then maybe because there were funding cuts. So even though they're low income, like why can't they afford food? Because there were funding cuts for SNAP. So they really, despite being low income, they might only get 20 bucks a month. So this is how you kind of go through it. And so why would they have uncontrolled asthma? Why would they have malnutrition? Why would they have obesity? Why would they have lack of access? Why, until you get to this bigger picture. And so I will share the link to this, and so you can explore it at your leisure. But this is what I want you to start. This is how I want you to start thinking whenever we talk about different health issues.